This conversation, recorded in late May, features Kumar Thangudu. Kumar is an engineer by training, a marketing professional, and a dynamic, incisive writer on issues related to economics, tech, and policy. I reached out to Kumar after reading his blog post, American Dynamism is Hypetastic, in which he dumps a cold dose of reality on America's hopes for reshoring manufacturing. Kumar's analysis was particularly striking because it ventured into subjects I hadn't normally heard about in the debate around American manufacturing. Things like America's onerous licensing requirements, or over-generous pension liabilities, or something he calls a materials-energy balance. Over the course of the discussion, Kumar unpacks how the current architecture of America's labor, legal, and financial systems makes it exceedingly difficult to build things. He also touches on the quiet cartelization of key industries, the subtle nationalization of private equity, and how the US healthcare system has become a magnet for fraud, calling out what he sees as an economy overrun with grift. Towards the middle of the conversation, we also get into Kumar's solutions. If he was in charge of America's industrial policy, what specific changes would he make? I found Kumar's solutions were just as interesting and idiosyncratic as his analysis of the problem. This is a wide-ranging and frankly provocative conversation. We hope you enjoy it. Kumar, thanks for being here.
For sure.
And so we're going to jam a little bit today on primarily macroeconomics and a little bit of geopolitics in there. So really looking forward to getting your thoughts on this. And so I thought the place we could jump off, I'm going to be referencing some of the writing you've done on your site. And I thought a great place for us to jump off and spend a good amount of time is US reindustrialization. And specifically, like, what's the problem, man? This is the one thing that maybe one of like four things in American politics right now that both sides of the aisle can agree on. We should bring back manufacturing jobs to the US. We should reindustrialize. Trump wants to do it. Biden wants to do it. Everybody wants to do it. So you've put out some interesting, pieces of analysis, sort of your thoughts on why though the idea is nice, the reality of it is actually maybe more daunting than we're appreciating. So would love to get into that a little bit. But why don't you give us a high level view on your thoughts on that? Go ahead.
Yeah, there's a few items around it. So one, the US dollar is reigning supreme. That makes it harder to bring back manufacturing. Two, our labor supply is overregulated. So, if you go to Japan, they've got one licensing board for all plumbers, electricians at the national level. We have 50 in the US, and they're at each state level. So you've got a labor issue, and your licensure is onerous. A nail technician has more hours of licensure than an EMT. That's an often cited example. The other thing is the people that rely on these occupational licensures, it's about $200 to $300 billion worth of private equity money, which is pension money, which means it's national assets in a way, with bankers taking the VIG, bankers and fund allocators taking the VIG. It's not swashbuckling industrialism. Another thing is our energy grid. So we'd have to rapidly increase the total energy production of the U.S. quickly, more rapidly than we've ever done it in any single year. The fifth is our population density. The sixth is the local permitting permissions. The seventh is our total overall pension infrastructure, healthcare, and defense debt per capita or per taxpayer. The next one would be our median age. And so I think all of these things kind of work against what people are trying to do in terms of manufacturing. Another issue is, our EPA is rather onerous and sometimes for many good reasons. I agree with a lot of Jim Jones's decisions. He left the HHS, but I think he was moving and pushing the right things in many ways, helping protect Americans from toxic stuff in the food supply. And he did stuff like that in the EPA as well. Some of it good. I'm sure there's people who would argue some of it's onerous. And then, those are the types of things like I was thinking about. But, we can talk about specific ones if you want. That's just off of the top of my head. I'm sure I mentioned more in the blog posts.
Yeah, I mean, you have one blog post. I think the title is American dynamism is hypetastic, something of that nature. And you get into like kind of 10 different areas, many of them which you listed. And then there's another one where you talk about the age issue. So I counted a total of 11 different problems that you've identified. And so um, maybe we could drill into those a little bit, help people get a real like, kind of a sense of the reality of these issues. And then you've also done kind of a, your proposal for how you would go about making it happen, like five-step plan to actually do reindustrialization that might work. And maybe we can get into that in a little bit. Does that sound like a good flow?
Yes. You want to pick one? We can pick
Yeah,
one and
yeah.
let's kind of pseudo randomly
I
wander in.
think yeah, one of the areas is around this sort of it's actually like it's hard to be an employer in America. And then there's sort of two things there. I think you mentioned the EEOC and then licensure sort of requirements. It's like hard to like do
Yes.
things and get things done and have permission even just to get started. So like why don't we get into that a little bit? Like give us a little bit of detail on that. Like what is the problem with the EEOC? What's going on with these licensures? What's the holdup there?
Okay. So EEOC mandates the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission. If you talk to any lawyer in HR, these lawsuits are getting bigger and bigger. There's a risk to holding a very large bag of W-2s in terms of the types of lawsuits you can absorb. AI is probably going to make those lawsuits greater because it gives the common person access to interpret law, right? So there's going to be something around that, I'm sure. On the licensure piece, this is a big deal. Like 40, 50 years ago, I think it was 1 in 20 jobs. My numbers might be wrong on the number of years, but it was like 1 in 20 jobs that required licensure. Today, it's 1 in 4. In California, it's 1 in 3. And there's some studies out there that say, because it's 1 in 3, California has a higher recidivism rate. That's complicated because as well, they have the 3 strikes rule, blah, 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 like people returning to prison. So, it's arguable, but the point is this works against the average American because you can't move between states. It also raises the average cost of services for women, especially, right? Because if you think about your nail and hair, women are going to spend on those things in their 20s to 30s and even beyond. It takes 1,600 hours or some crazy number of hours to certify in becoming a nail tech or esthetician. They cannot move equally between states, right? So if you look at like the percentage composition of what it takes to get of your salary to get your nails done and your hair done in the way you want in different countries, in the US, it's like heavily inflated. We're the only country on the planet where a plumber, like my plumber in Houston, he sold a Bugatti to Canelo, the boxer. There's no other country on the planet where I think plumbers often become multi millionaires. It's a byproduct of licensure. Those licensing boards are in every state, and they're managed by the incumbent license holders. So of course they would want to keep the denominator small, right? Of course they'd want to increase the power of their licenses. Now, that's a cartel as well. In Arizona, they had a situation back in 2019 where they did universal licensure acceptance. You can go read into it. I'm paraphrasing these things, but I think I'm precise, but not fully accurate. So they did something where both houses of Congress, the Senate and the House, were Republican, and it took them about 10 to 12 months, but they switched it over to this universal licensure. Now that still didn't fix everything, but that's one state out of 49. There's 30 states with dual houses of Congress owned by Republicans, and those 30 states make up about 54 to 46%, somewhere in that range, of the percentage of licensed jobs in the US. So the other 20 you're not going to get coverage on. And here's the other problem. Again, I mentioned that the people that are putting a lot of capital into owning these licensures are private equity, which gets their money from pensions. So one of the only moats of these HVAC roll-ups, these welding roll-ups, et cetera, is the licensure. That's it. That's the primary. It's the labor and the licensure that's of high value. The brand, the Google ads, the Google reviews, those mean something, but it's the talent pool, because what you can do is you can use cheap government capital to buy it, roll it up, issue it as a security, play some sort of banking racket, and then you run the game. Private equity, I always say, is kind of like glorified government contracting. Most people don't like to see it that way. I would say VC is largely the same, right? Because most people, even the swashbuckling industrialist types that think they're like, the angel investors that think, oh, most of them are angling for pension funds in one way or the other, whether it's a hedge fund, a PE fund, or a VC fund to buy their bags, right? It's all a game. But at the end of the day, the government's buying it. It's kind of like the stealth nationalization of our economy. We have in the US something like 30% of GDP is government expenditure. But if you start to count the total amount of assets that are pension owned or pension derivative owned, I think that number gets a lot higher. We just don't see it that way. When we look at a venture capitalist, we think to ourselves, oh, swashbuckling industrialist. We don't think, nah, that guy's that guy or that woman is a government contractor. And even if they have private LP money, they're just chasing the idea of the government buying their business. Right. So, we're in a very tough position on licensure. I think the PE companies will put up a fight if it ever tries to get proposed. It's a cartel. It's balkanized. It's hard. I think it's hard coded into the system. And I think it's going to take more than a year to rectify. And as that happens, our median age just goes up and up and up and up. So like right now, if you were to go on Chat AI and say, hey, what's the median age of the three most critical licensed construction like contractor types, you're going to see something probably from like 39 to 43, right? And for every 7 retirees in skilled construction trades, there's only 1 replacement, right? So that this licensure problem, it's onerous, it's impacting the mobility of workers, and it's not talked about by anybody in the American dynamism community for the most part. So that's a big deal, I would say.
Wow. There's kind of, I definitely want to get into this sort of pseudo nationalization and really lay out that pipeline that you're talking about because I don't think that's how people look at PE. And I want to sort of draw that thread, but just to before we get into that, a couple of things. One is ostensibly licensure is there to make sure like frauds or unskilled people don't enter into areas where, lack of skill could be damaging, right? Which is a lot of different kinds of occupations. Obviously, the nail and hair salon, that sort of thing is a nice example, even though there, I'm sure, if somebody's not skilled, you could do some damage, with a clipper or whatever you're using. But like, do you think we're just totally out of whack with like with just the reality of like what it's basically become cartelized. That's kind of your analysis. Like it's not really defending
Yeah.
safety and these kinds of things anymore. It's like out of tune with that. And then the second thing is, can you tie this back to? I want to keep tying it back to reindustrialization when we can because that's kind of our jumping off point. Like the nail and hair salon thing is a cool example, but what does that have to like? What are these licensors? How do they impact our ability to like build up manufacturing in the U.S. again? So hit those 2 points, yeah.
Okay, so the first part is the question is, are they onerous? And I'd say yes, they are onerous, which means they prevent commerce and they're not reasonable. Are they onerous versus reasonable? They're not reasonable. And we know this because how do we know that they're reasonable? Give me a second. Let me think about this. Oh, okay, like here's an example of an unreasonable licensure, right? You have to pay $600 a year to be a boxing announcer. It requires licensure in the state of California.
Sorry, you were muffled there a little bit. A boxing announcer, like boxers in
Yeah.
the ring? Oh wow.
Yeah.
Okay.
There's like a fee to be a boxing announcer. You can just go look this up with Chat AI, and you can also ask it to compare it to countries that are quickly industrializing. And you can see that they have a freedom of labor and skill. Um, I talk with one of the guys. He and his crew. They're the 17th largest holder of single family homes in the country. It's a company called Bridge Tower GP, and he mentioned to me in passing a while ago. He mentioned to me that 15% of the cost of a real estate development, anywhere from 10 to 15%, is the cost of materials. Right. I don't know what the cost of labor is, but I have to imagine it's also high. So, we're always looking at like prop tech and real estate tech deals, right? Well, it seems like they don't really address the meat of the issue around the labor limitations, the insurance limitations for as far as the capital stack goes, and then as well, um, you've got the problem of a 6 to 12 month permitting time, right? So it takes 6 to 12 months. Like you can do all you want with venture financing, right? But you still haven't sped up the 6 to 12 month permitting time, right? And there's times when I need to build something ad hoc. I make realizations along the way. I can't tell you. I've talked to so many manufacturing engineers where they don't get the plan just right, and they can make ad hoc impromptu improvements to their systems by building things. But if you're not allowed to build, if the labor is hard to dispatch, if you can't get them across state lines, all of a sudden you've got huge issues, right? So yeah, I'd say it's onerous, not reasonable. And then what was the second question again?
You already got into it a little bit, but maybe you can flesh it out a little more. Is how does it connect to like where does this create a challenge for reindustrialization specifically? Like what are the
Yeah,
key things needed that are blocked by this licensure system?
the shovel has to hit the ground, and you have to go through. There's not one regulatory, like in the U.S. we have 168,000 city, state, municipal, district, county governments, and then you have licensure boards, and it's not the same across all 50 states. So if you want to expand to all 50 states, you've got to have like a team of lawyers to do the franchising game. It's very hard to own. There's so many businesses where it's hard to be an asset manager in all 50 states. And you are an asset manager when you build in all 50 states. I'll give you an example, right? I mentioned that fund, but the smartest real estate funds that are over a billion, let's say they're putting copper in the home, they go on the commodities markets and hedge the price of copper locally, domestically, internationally, whatever, right? Small shops can't do that. They also have a legal team to go navigate the local laws and regs and permits. We can't do that. We don't have manifest destiny on fiber optic and 5G. India does. Like India's leapfrogging us, unfortunately. I mean, good thing for India, but like bad for the US, right? Like we should have a faster rollout of 5G and fiber optic cables everywhere, right? But our permitting time isn't like 2 months. Our permitting time is forever, and it costs a lot too.
Can you just clarify what you mean by manifest destiny on 5G and that
Yeah,
sort of
but
stuff? Like whoever can do it gets to do it. Like what does that mean exactly? Yeah.
manifest destiny is this historical concept of sea to shining sea. So India has a policy of kind of sea to shining sea on fiber optic. The U.S. needs something like this, absolutely, right? 5G consumes 90% less electricity per unit of data, right? Per unit of streaming data, and fiber optic just certainly helps, right? So it's problematic that we don't have a low cost of fiber deployment, and I would say it's largely because of the regulations as well as the occupational licensure around both. So I think it makes it hard to industrialize when there's just piles and piles of paperwork to get through before you can do anything. Like you can't just buy real estate. You got to go deal with the state. You can't buy real estate and then just go start building things. It's one thing after the other.
Right. Um, and a lot of it, to your point, unreasonable. Like they're probably because some vested interest benefits from reducing competition or something of that nature, or that may very well be what's driving it, rather than some kind of desire to very consciously do a build out, so that it's not like damaging to the ecosystem or something like that.
It's for the benefit of the incumbent, not for the benefit of competition and free markets, right? So,
Yeah.
I'm not people that's like a libertarian or anything like this. Like there never was a free market is kind of my mindset. You can just kind of get it as close as you can.
Totally, yeah. No, you see this pattern emerge, like when the Dodd-Frank regulation hit the banking world post '08. Ever since then, like the largest banks have only gotten larger, and what you're seeing is like a hollowing out of like small community banks and like those kinds of things. It's like and a lot of people will point to the fact that and not just that, there was a huge drought in like new charters for banks, like in the whole 2010s. Like you almost didn't see any um, newly chartered banks sort of come up when the U.S. historically has been a place that's had a very sort of diversified, decentralized kind of banking system. And a lot of people will point to like just more and more onerous regulation making it impossible for upstarts to compete. You see it in kind of in a previous incarnation. I was covering like fintech and stuff like that at a previous job, and would see it with some of these payment apps where you'd have to get like different kinds of licenses in every state, and it's just very chaotic, and you just need a lot of capital to just do the regulatory stuff. But and you're saying that when you just say like 6 to 12 months delay, in my mind, it's like, okay, that's not such a big deal. We'll be delayed 6 to 12 months, but we're thinking about long-term, 20-year, 30-year economic like policy. If we have to delay 6 to 12 months to put up a factory doesn't seem like a big deal. But I think what you're saying is like they layer on top of each other, and it just makes it like maybe the delays are potentially multiple years long once you factor everything in. Is that roughly right?
Yeah, I think a 6 to 12 month delay is onerous, right? You have so many things to
It is
manage just with
onerous.
ads. Yeah, because it's in other countries I don't have that, and I can build in under 30 to 60 days. I can go to Japan and build something, right? I don't. There's one licensing board nationally. I can get a worker from any part of Japan, bring them to a different province in Japan, and they can work.
Right.
In the U.S., you don't have that, so
Right.
we
Right.
have a massive, massive issue. A
Yeah.
lot of people might have a license and they have other people work under them. There's all these kind of rackets around it, but I want to point out one thing. There's no other country on the planet where you have consistent scenarios of plumbers, electricians, HVAC professionals, welders becoming multi millionaires. It's only in the United States. It's a byproduct of our licensure system, right? It tells you that something's off with it. Not
Right.
that there's anything wrong with people being millionaires. That's great, but like I'm not
Right.
here to I'm not here to sit and pretend like they're swashbuckling industrialists.
Right, right. Fair enough. Good nuance there. You brought up another area. Maybe we can get into that and then go into this expansion of the government as a sort of prime mover of the economy. But you mentioned healthcare, and I think healthcare debt, healthcare expenses. I think that's related a little bit to employment costs. Um, could you get into, I don't know if you remember, I could read that segment of the blog post to you. I know it's from 2024 when you wrote this, so if you'd like, I can read it back to you. But how does like healthcare costs factor in to somebody looking to make a decision of do I invest capital to build a factory or some kind of industry on US soil? Yeah.
So when you hire an employee in the U.S., right, there are fees associated with the W-2 that are artificially enforced by the government requiring you to pay for healthcare. And the problem in the U.S. system is we're the only system on the planet whereby the insurance company makes money every time you're prescribed a drug treatment or therapy. We have a very bastardized system in the sense, like, let me give you an example. We have 12 different types of pharmacies. We have group purchasing organizations. You have pharmacy benefits managers.
When you say
You
12 different types, that's not like CVS and Walgreens are two different types. There's like different
no
types, the categories. Yeah.
different categories of pharmacy. Go look it up. Go look up like types of pharmacies USA, and you'll see some stuff. Um, you have pharmacy benefits managers. You have drug wholesalers, drug distributors. You have generics, then you have originals. It's a very complex tapestry. And at the end of the day, when you do the math between the public accounts and what comes out, there's kind of this invisible system of kickbacks, and it's complicated. And, South Florida is the ground zero of it. Go talk to the criminals, go talk to the ex cons in South Florida. You'll learn how quickly this became a cartel. Now, it was sort of three different squadrons of people. The first, this is how it was explained to me when I talked to some cops in South Florida. The first was kind of the Russian Jewish mob. Then it transitioned over to Cubans. Cubans would come over, a lot of well-doing Cubans and a lot of, some Cubans that were getting into petty street crime when they came over from Cuba. They would end up in jails with the mob guys who were running healthcare scams on Medicare and Medicaid. The Cuban guys would learn, and then they would commit the same types of fraud. That's how they learned it, right? And then Indians got in because we're 1% of the population, but like I think 5 to 10% of healthcare. So you and I both know a ton of other Indians. There's always someone in our network who's committed some form of healthcare fraud and gone to jail, and our parents are like, "Don't ever do something like this," right? And it's always like, oh, I hate that. Like, I hate that somebody from our tribe ran this racket on the American people, right? And so it's kind of, the Jews mostly left healthcare. You don't see as many Jewish doctors these days. And now it's like Cubans and Indians running the racket, so to speak, right? Um, South Florida is the epicenter of it, but I got so much exposure to how those things work, and it's a shame. There's certain industries in healthcare where you're just like, why does it work that way, right? And it's because it's the system designed for kickbacks back to the insurance company, and it's all very convoluted. I had it drawn on a whiteboard for me by different people, con and non-ex-con and all sorts of things, and it's kind of given me some context on what's going on. But to sum it up, we're the only system on the planet where the healthcare insurance company makes money every time you're prescribed a drug, treatment, or therapy. And it's arguably the only market where one of the drug distribution strategies is to price it higher. Price your product higher, so when it goes into the distribution system, everybody can eat, right? So we'll see how everything shakes out. But it's very cartelized. There's not a good solution to it, and we have a critical problem in the American healthcare system. Rome didn't fall overnight. It was like a 20-year time period where we'll say the pension, defense, healthcare, and infrastructure debt per taxpayer just grew to unsustainable amounts. And right before it happened, as I understand it, explained to me by people who study history more closely than me, people reached for the coffers of government money. So, tyrannies have a way of turning inwards, right? So it could go on a lot longer in the US only because our property rights are ironclad. Technology kind of shields us from a bit. But, it's I'm not one of these people who's like the Michael Berry, right? But it's unclear to me how we get out of this. There's situations in the healthcare system where drug distribution is still done with cash payments. Think about that. And there's situations in the healthcare industry where they take they call this product drug diversion. Let's say they take a Gucci version of a drug, the Gucci drug inside the Gucci box. They pull out the Gucci drug out of the Gucci box and put in a generic version in the Gucci box and sell that to the insurance company. They take the Gucci drug and they sell that on street value. These types of rackets are running game all day long in South Florida.
Oh, I see. So it's like just like sort of non-professional, non-licensed people who are just taking advantage of the price arbitrage, basically, is what you're saying. It's like an informal economy is developed around. Is that
It's
what
a
you're referring
racket,
to?
and if we went and pulled 5 ex-cons from healthcare to tell us exactly how it works,
Yeah.
most Americans would be like, "Oh fuck,"
Yeah. Yeah. No,
Um,
sorry, go ahead. Finish it up.
no, everybody knows it's broken. Very few people understand this one reality, which is there's no other system where the healthcare insurance company makes money every time you prescribe a drug, treatment, or therapy. And this is like the critical core component. No other healthcare system works like that.
Right, right. I mean, it feeds into this idea. I don't know, maybe you've heard it. Sometimes people will try to promote this kind of meme that we don't have healthcare in America, we have sick care. Because if you have a system where people get paid sort of to prescribe you treatments, or basically people, it's like the people who have the deepest knowledge of the body and how it functions are paid after you get sick, not to keep you healthy. This is kind of a thing people will sort of refer to. Um, and so the incentives are kind of like, well, you have a sick care system basically. So the incentives are sort of to sort of promote these kinds of treatments, to promote more
Well,
pharmaceuticals, things of this nature. Yeah.
the other problem is with the proliferation of COVID, we now flip back the laws, and we were able to prescribe ketamine and all sorts of other drugs to people over the phone
Yeah.
without touching and feeling the patient.
Mhm.
And so this was a shift. You could have done it in the early 2000s. There's a few guys who did it, but they didn't
Mhm.
prescribe psychoactives. There was a period of time when we were prescribing psychoactives. So now you have an entire generation of folks with ADHD medications financed by pension money, right? And they're blowing a literal hole in everybody's hormonal health, right? So ADHD medication has an impact on men and women's hormone levels. In the US, like I've talked to a guy who had like several 100,000 blood tests and data. In the US, women in the US have elevated progesterone and estrogen and lower testosterone. And it's multiple things. It's obviously stress, it's the food supply, but it's also like the cosmetic supply, and then as well the the kind of this racket of how the prescriptions work. Like the whole purpose of a therapist in this country, I don't know if you remember, there was a period of time where every freaking athlete was basically saying, "Oh, I need mental health stuff," right? And I was like, what's really going
Right.
on? So I talked to some guys who are ex-cons, they have collars and stuff, and what they were saying was they want every American to go to a therapist and they want to normalize it because they're going to get kickbacks on all these compounded drugs,
Mm.
right? So it's a fascinating thing, right? Um,
Mm-hmm.
how that all plays out. I'm not pretending to know the full racket,
Mm-hmm.
but it's fairly straightforward that there is a racket and it's
Mm-hmm.
multiple forces at play, and it's a
Mm-hmm.
big ecosystem.
Totally.
Um,
Yeah. That's, I mean, I don't know the details, but it wouldn't surprise me if all kinds of shady stuff was going on, given that it's like one fifth of GDP, that whatever $5, $6 trillion is a big trough to feed from, and it wouldn't be surprising if we were to dig under, under the through the layers,
you,
we'd find all kinds of crazy stuff.
you
Um,
know, our
Go
balance
ahead.
sheets going to go sideways on our old age dependency ratios,
Right.
and it's cartelized because the AARP is a cartel of old people. The old people are here to make sure that the young people pay into the system that keeps the old people alive. I think it's like 30 to 60% of all the healthcare spend per capita is done after the age of 60 or 70. It's towards the end of life.
Right.
So this is why there's like a sort of rush to palliative care, because it's kind of the question internally of like, oh, this has become too onerous. We're not getting enough kickbacks. How can we lightly let people die without being a burden on the old age dependency ratio kind of
Mm.
fabric? And again, I'm saying I'm precise here. I'm not so detailed, but like you got to understand these guardrails. They're important for understanding the system at large, which is no other system has a healthcare insurance company that makes profits every time they service a person or product.
Right. I want to get to the aging society thing at one point, and so I'll circle back to that. But just before we sort of move on from the healthcare thing, I mean, we talked a lot about, this specific thing about insurance companies getting paid every time a pharmaceutical is prescribed. But can you again just tie it back to the investor
Manufacturing.
who wants to build a factory? Like connect that thread? Yeah.
So what's my cost? Okay, like we comparing this in currency is not a good way to think about it. And it's because currencies are volatile. They are exposed to all sorts of things. But if we think about it in terms of kilowatt hours or flops, right? How many dollars in kilowatt hours? Let's say I'm building a semiconductor manufacturing facility that produces things that do floating point operations per second, right? How many kilowatt hours in dollars do I have to spend per a flop of productive work from a worker, right? I believe it's a lot more if you add up all the all the W-2 salary and junk fees. And it's not easy to replace, not easy to recruit, right? So you have a problem. The other thing is in the US, if you go to the average engineer, they're not able to pass the professional engineering exam. We've got the departure of 60,000 factories. You're paying a huge amount to an engineer. I have friends that are making like 300 to 500K as an engineer at these defense subcontractors for moving around pixels and shaking database cells. I'm sorry, like this is a little odd. We go to a place like China, we know what the hard cost of getting someone to do those types of things are. It's certainly not 300 to 500K a year. So you have a fundamental cost mismatch as well as like the amount of kilowatt hours you have to spend. And you have to spend a lot in the US. We do not allow density. We don't allow density at all in any reasonable way in most of the US.
Right. Density of population.
Correct.
Right. Yeah. That's the whole NIMBYism thing. Um, uh, okay. So fundamentally, what you're saying, I mean, but even the 300 to 500K person at the defense contractor, that's their base salary. That's not factoring in the healthcare costs that you're talking about. So
the healthcare costs, the cost of getting sued. Again, those EEOC mandates are pretty aggressive.
Right.
Maybe they've been rolled back with the DEI rollback.
Right.
What hasn't been rolled back is I refer to most of the pension money going into venture capital and PE as DEI for the privileged class. I call it the
You're just calling
DEI.
everybody out. This is gonna be.
No, it's look, and I've been a
Go ahead. Go ahead.
beneficiary.
Go ahead. No, no, no. Go
I've
for it.
been
Go
a
for it.
beneficiary of it, but I'm not going to sit here and pretend like I was a swashbuckling industrialist, right? I've done some things that are industrialist in my life, but the reality is like I've absorbed pension money whereby someone was allocating, usually someone white passing, or an Asian from an Ivy League institution. Because again, it's not flyover state whites that are getting the money to allocate. It's not Mexicans. It's like a certain crew of people. Let's be very fucking candid, right? These people are compensated above market management performance and employment fees and upside fees for below public market performance, right? And we know this is true because you can find, like, let's say you were bullish on the internet, right? You could have bought the underlying ISPs, their dividends, and their IPv4 address blocks. Those would have increased in value massively, and it would have been a riskless investment for the most part through a high and low interest rate cycle. That's a $400 billion market. What percentage of funds did that outperform, right? So it's just a racket, and once you accept that, then you become more cognizant. So I see a lot of people being like, "Oh, DEI is terrible." It's like, nah, dude, you fucking work in a venture fund and nothing you've ever done has ever beat the market. So like, who's really the recipient of DEI? You've received like how much money, and it's not even market relevant. Like what your end performance shows that what you're doing is less relevant. You see what I'm saying? So I kind of have a different viewpoint on it. I like
I hear
working
what
in
you're
tech.
saying. You sound like should I say it? Uh, a more aggressive Warren Buffett in many ways. Calling out the the sort of endemic underperformance in a lot of these sort of asset management industries, and maybe we can get into that. But just to just sort of close off, I guess I guess the category I'll bucket that maybe we'll do this in like little segments, and I think what we just got into is like a lot of the additional hidden costs of employment, and costs in terms of money, costs in terms of time to just get things done. Whether it's EEOC risk, whether it's like licensor that just sort of, puts molasses into the process, or the healthcare costs, like it's underappreciated just how onerous of a burden that becomes for somebody who's looking to put in sort of long-term risk capital into manufacturing space, which also struggles from all these other risks that we're about to get into. So, is that fair? That's kind of like that's kind of the category. That's like one category of problem. There's just the cost to get anything done is inflated upfront. Not even
We,
accounting
we,
for the other
we,
risks. Yeah,
I have a blog post somewhere in there. You should read it. It's called like, it's kind of the order of operations if we did want to reshore,
right. I want to
right?
get
So
into that. Yeah, yeah. Go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah. So I'd say it costs a lot. That's an oversimplification.
Yeah, yeah.
It's structurally uh, structurally disadvantageous, and we
Right,
won't move manufacturing back to the U.S. We're running out of certain critical metals, et cetera, et cetera.
right, right.
Um, there's no point. There's no net benefit to us. So I'll give you an example. The textiles industry left the United States.
Mm.
1/5 of all industrial wastewater pollution is textile dye. We're not going to come back to producing textiles in the US. The Chinese know more than us, to be quite frank. We're behind the times. We don't know what we're doing. So it's complicated, but it's not coming back. Like, this is it's not coming back at any relevant scale. Let's say that.
Mm. Mm.
The other thing is, the point of industrialism, right? If we think about it from like a base level perspective at an atomic level,
Yeah,
the point of industrialism is threefold. One, real industrialism creates lower kilowatt hours put into a process product or ton of service, process product or service. Two, it has a lower geochemical industrial footprint. And three, it creates less stress on the energy grid. Most of the things that we've done are not freaking industrialist. Think about this. In the United States, we are the mecca of natural gas. We have 65 million homes with piped natural gas in. In India, it costs you $1,000 to $2,000 to convert your vehicle to CNG. In Italy, it costs $1,000 to $2,000 to convert your vehicle to CNG. To put up a slow fill overnight compressor in your own home, maybe it's like 5 to 8K or less. To put up a fast fill CNG station, compressed natural gas station, it might be 250K, and then you got the land costs. In the United States, to convert your vehicle, it's anywhere from $8,000 to $15,000. And to put up a station, it's $2 to $5 million. We shot ourselves in the foot by putting in onerous regulations against CNG proliferation, expansion of stations, and fuel and fleet conversion. And it's a no-brainer in terms of energy return on investment because you already have 65 million homes with the stuff piped in. We're the mecca of natural gas.
Right, right.
So,
Like you
so
could just fill your car while it's in the driveway. Is that what you're saying? If you just like put another pipe in or something, is that kind of the
it
thought
it,
there?
bur- it burns clean. The average distance the fuel transports is lower. It keeps the refineries more free to do more work. We have a
Mm-hmm.
shortage of refineries, right? So that's an issue as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
So
I've rode in one of those cars. It was kind of interesting seeing the way they fill it up at the gas station, that it runs on natural gas, that the car could do both. It could do the fuel and it could do the natural gas also. If I was talking to the driver about it, so that he was explaining. But yeah,
yeah,
we don't have any of that in the U.S. But we produce like we're like a swing producer globally in natural gas, but we don't have those kinds of cars. Yeah.
correct. And you think about the amount of onerous work we've got to do to pull different modalities of crude out of the ground, send them to different modalities of refinery. And those refineries have like 5, 10 billion, $20 billion crackers inside that break down the crude into useful products. And all the complexity in that is it's not simple or easy. Natural gas is very straightforward. Pull it out of the ground, shove it into our car, get very high. You get 90% of the miles per gallon, but again, it burns clean. It doesn't wear down the car as much per a mile moved. So, we've got fundamental issues. The point of industrialism is to get better kilowatt hours per unit of something, right? We're just doing it all backwards. We proliferated EVs, which have 4x to 100x the farm to fork cost per kilowatt hours, as I like to say. It depends on the grid modality and how much we burn, et cetera, et cetera. So nothing's in place. There's no conspiracy. Our great planners are not technocrats. I'm sorry. Like I called most of them, they're like the max intellectual competency of most of them is physics, electrical engineering, and CS. There's very little petroleum, geological, and chemical and materials competency in our great
Mhm.
planners, unfortunately.
And you think that's a what is that a why? Where did that competence go?
Not it's clearly it's not like we don't have it because like
Hmm.
for a small, let's say we put out a small subsidy,
Yeah.
we would reduce our overall imports by a ton.
Hmm.
If we put out a small subsidy for everybody to have a slow fill CNG station, if we gave tax incentives to CNG fast fill stations, if we made it easy to convert your vehicle,
Hmm.
we could unfurl ourselves. It would be an immediate energy return on investment in a very short amount of time,
Hmm.
right? Make us more self-reliant, to be frank with you.
Hmm.
It would reemploy more of our people too. That's the
Hmm.
reality.
So this is that material energy balance that you wrote about, these sort of three things. Is could you maybe break down that concept a little bit more carefully, and then those sort of three aspects, and then maybe point to another place maybe where we're sort of failing on that account, and why is that so important to a reindustrialization process?
Um, okay, so the way to think about it is like mankind went from burning wood to coal to natural gas. And at each step, we always burned less of that substance to get more kilowatt hours. We always had a smaller or decreasing chemical, geological, and industrial process footprint around all three as we went from left to right, right? If you think about battery chemistry, we went from lead acid to nickel cadmium to lithium ion, kind of like right to left on the periodic table. Now, if you go any more left on the periodic table, you're going to get like lithium fluoride. Fluoride is like highly reactive. You get explosive batteries. But, trying to push further than that is going to be pretty difficult. We're not going to get like a 20x in battery performance anytime. anytime soon without some massive, trade-offs. So this is what technology. You ask what is technology? Technology does these three things, right? And so humans behave along the lines of which you get better energy return on investments, and you're reducing the footprint and you're reducing the stress on the grid, right? So that's just human behavior if you had to define it to an alien in mathematical terms, right? So we're not doing any of those steps to embrace what we have, and we've shot ourselves in the foot because we don't allow ourselves to build with density. The average food in the US is transported 300 to 700 kilometers, as I understand it. In Europe, it's less than 100, right? So we put ourselves in a pretty difficult position because of our density, because of our inability to build new rail and high-speed rail and transportation methods for things.
Interesting. How would you, God, I mean, these are like fundamental issues. I don't know how you would.
How would I begin to fix them?
Yeah, yeah.
So the first thing I would do is right now, my friend Adam Townsend, you can read his blog, adamtownsend.me. He's the one who kind of pointed out to me how payroll and how payrolls are influenced by salaries and how they influence local government budgets. It's not something I'd ever looked at, especially coming from startups, right? I just didn't give a fuck. Now, when I think about what I've learned from going down the rabbit hole on that stuff, I think one of the things we can do is a lot of the government workers, they have unsustainable pensions. We need to convert those to something sustainable but fair, and we need to make compromises with them. This is very difficult to do. It's a cartel. Because you think about it, there's a nurse in the University Medical System of California who's making $500,000 a year after she retires until she dies. So, it's kind of like the unionized few, or the unionized many versus the taxed few. So these government employees are, after retirement, they're like a different class of American. They often leave the states they're in, go to Florida, and then, that money doesn't stay in that economy over there. So we've got to switch over new government employees, not old ones. We keep the agreements with the old ones because they've spent their time, they've paid their dues. But with new government employees, we need to have a plan to curtail and to make it more fair in terms of like a 401k, like a normal, private industry abandoned pensions. The government needs to abandon a pension structure in favor of something that is more like a 401k or 401kb or one of these things. So, I don't know the exact solution, but it's certainly not what we have now, where, we make these government employees a different class of citizen with the salary they're going to get. We put them in the top 1%. There are lifeguards who are going to make $300K a year after they retire till they die. Think about that. $300K a year. It's nuts. And the life expectancy is up, right? So this is it has to be done. It's going to break the back of Americans. So that's like a thing, right? So this is number one. Number two, permitting. If we want to get very high energy return on investment activities done in the US, that means taking less of the energy, using it for more productive things. We have to reduce the stress on the energy grid. There's a few ways we can do that. One, we have to have manifest destiny for fiber optic and 5G. So with natural gas pipelines, we should fast track a plan to let natural gas pipelines have a program to sell their easements to fiber optic companies. Make it super easy, make it straightforward, streamline these things. There's so many policies they could put in place. We have fiber that's inactive. We have a lot of dark fiber. We need to put policies in place that proliferate it. The faster our connectivity, the higher our energy return on investment, the speedier the transactions go, et cetera, et cetera. Another thing we can do, and same for 5G. Another thing we can do is we can reduce the amount of time it takes to permit. Florida did this, and there are certain departments inside of Florida where if the local permitting office doesn't get back to you fast enough, they get penalized. I believe Ron DeSantis implemented this in 2019, 2021. So if you go read on that, right? So we need to remove onerous controls on the permission to build. After you've done these things, you kind of have to calm down. You have to get all the PE guys in a room because they're really just government contractors. And you have to say, hey, we're going to start to peel away and standardize across all 50 states. We're going to create a program where we get these things in order. Now, I don't know the exact mechanics of how to do that because it's not a federal thing. It's a state by state thing. So now you have two fabrics kind of crisscrossing, right? You have one that's a federal fabric of labor regulations with the local labor regulations of licensure, right? So you've got to create a national incentive for every state and the incumbent license holders to make their licensure requirements more standardized so labor can move between states. And you eventually have to lower them to be less onerous. If and only if you've done some of these things, can we hope to move things forward? The last thing we can do is, again, removing onerous controls on natural gas vehicle conversion to compressed natural gas, as well as slow fill station for the home and fast fill station commercially for consumers and for private companies. These are things we could do to move in the right direction. They would ease our energy grid to allow us to take advantage of industrialism. So we could dispatch more energy more efficiently to producing things. But that's sort of the workflow I think would help move things forward. But right now, nobody wants to carry a big bag of W-2s. It's in no one's best interest. I wouldn't do it. Like the money says you shouldn't do it.
Mm. So basically, reform, and by reform, you kind of mean like dissolve the pension liabilities over time, even within the government. Um, do a kind of manifest destiny approach on all sort of technology platforms that deliver sort of high energy return on investment. Whether
Well,
that's
no. Allow fiber and 5G to proliferate as far and wide as possible.
okay. And then you mentioned the natural gas thing also. Um,
Yes.
uh,
So
and
these are like tactical things nobody's discussing.
right,
Like instead of trying to invent something in fusion, we could achieve like a 6 times energy return on investment by wrangling with these things.
right.
And
Okay,
they're
got it.
low cost. They're internal gunshot wounds that we've inflicted on ourselves. We
Right.
need to like cauterize those wounds, remove the billet, and bandage them with something sustainable, right?
Okay. Okay. Then reduce onerous regulation so that people can get quicker permission to build things. Um, Figure out a sort of national framework for licenses, which will have to go through this sort of PE cartel that you've discussed, and then those things kind of combined will put us in a place where um, you now have a kind of national framework where manufacturing investments can start to like get out of the red in terms of the sort of projected returns. And then I think in the blog post you mentioned, then once we do all of this, then we can start to think about tariff games and like trade agreements and things of that nature. But if we don't sort this stuff out internally and we start with tariffs, um, it's like you're forcing people into a system that's like totally inhospitable to manufacturing investment in the first place. So it's not going to work. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. And again, I don't think any of these things are going to happen. We don't have
Yeah.
technocrats leading us inside of
Right.
any institution of government.
Yeah.
Um, and a technocrat closely studies the environment they're in and their dynamics before proposing a workflow. But these people don't even have the vocabulary, and this is across administrations. They don't have the vocabulary to think about our energy grids and our labor supply and the laws dynamically. It's not like a common skill set. There's only 30,000 chemical engineers in the US.
Hmm.
Small quantity, and I don't think that many of them work in government. So
How many do
you've
how
got
many
to,
do we need? Like how many would you say we need?
well, chemical engineers provide the highest energy return on investment with the highest effort,
Okay.
right? So when you employ a chemical engineer, they're going to get you very high kilowatt hours per process. Maybe the next after that is certain types of computer science. Maybe like chemical engineers and really good CS folks do that. Um, but yeah, we need a lot more chemical and materials engineers to wrangle to get us this kind of like energy savings at every level of the chain. Another area where we should do things is in terms of permitting. We need to do things to encourage state and city locales to proliferate density of construction, to allow it, to enable it. It's a very easy way to ease the stress on the energy grid and to make us more self-reliant.
Are you a fan of like sort of decentralized, rooftop solar and creating a more decentralized energy grid through that kind of
No, no, I think
no?
this is the fantasy of people who have never studied chemistry. When you put solar panels on,
Disabuse us. Yeah, go ahead.
uh, what ends up happening is when you put more solar panels, lithium ion batteries, wind turbines on the grid, you increase the number of intermittencies on the grid, and you actually produce the only source of energy that can flip on a dime, like flip really quickly, is natural gas peaking plants. What most people don't understand is when you take all of those three kind of intermittencies and you proliferate them across a grid pseudo randomly location wise, you increase the number of kilowatt hour, you increase the amount of natural gas per kilowatt hour that you burn on the entire grid because you have to peak up and down, right? So you actually create a huge problem in the entire grid. And if you think about it, the Chinese have the Gobi Desert, right? Why are they putting solar panels everywhere all over the Gobi Desert? Because it's a low energy return on investment activity, right? If they're doing EVs, they're lightweight EVs. Their vehicles weigh less than ours. The average distance traveled is less than ours, right? They're doing hybrids, I'm sure, as well. And they certainly have a lot of CNG. They went from 6,000 CNG vehicles in the year 1999 or 2000 all the way to 25 million now. It's not well discussed. There's now 40 manufacturers of CNG vehicles in India, right? So solar, wind, and the thing to keep in mind with wind turbines is they create a 7% CAGR in wind turbine lubricants, which come from oil and gas. The steel is made from coal. The concrete base is made from coal. The nacelle is made from steel as well. The components, the electronics, even if you think about CO2, which I don't think is a good way to think about things, you need things like sulfur hexafluoride to transmit electricity everywhere on the transformers. Sulfur hexafluoride has like 16 to 25,000 times the global warming potential of CO2. Inside of chips, you have something called nitrogen trifluoride. And nitrogen trifluoride has also 16 to 25,000 times the global warming potential of CO2. Those are in chips everywhere. So EVs don't help. They produce more stress on the grid. So that's an issue. There's not much you can do about that.
Got it. Interesting. And so that fails kind of that third criterion of the material energy balance and that sort of progression that we want to be doing. Yeah.
If I'm wrong, then POWL, it's a stock that's centered around our transmission grid. POWL is the ticker. Yeah. If I'm wrong, then that would decline. But that's done well. It's gone up. It's going to continue. It's the harder our grid dynamics, right, the more well geared that type of company is. The more intermittencies we place pseudo randomly across the grid, the more stress there is on the grid, and the more of that company there's going to be demand for.
And by intermittency, just because I'm not well versed in this, and perhaps many listeners won't be either, it's kind of the sort of fluctuations, unpredictable fluctuations in energy demand. Is that what that's referring to, or is it something else?
That's correct. Yeah.
Okay.
It's the fluctuation. So when the wind doesn't blow and the sun doesn't shine, and right, when the battery is not being utilized and it has to be charged during non-sunlight, non-wind hours, that's just more natural gas burn, right? Right. Right. Electricity you can use now and here and instantly, ad hoc, impromptu, is infinitely more valuable than electricity that has to be dispatched in a grid system. Okay. The only people telling you otherwise to what I've just said are physicists who don't study chemistry. So just be very, very cautious around physicists who don't study chemistry, because they'll lead you astray. And
why do you think, as physicists generally are pretty intelligent people, what do you think they're missing? What's missing in their model, their worldview?
I don't think they face the complexities of the physical world. And what ends up happening is a lot of physicists in this country have made it because CS and math go hand in hand. They're intuitive if you do physics, right? So a lot of them become software developers. So the class of people that's made more money has not been chemical engineers, it's been physicists, because computer science pays more. So I think what's happened is they've gotten elevated on a pedestal, but there's going to be a time where the chemical engineers make a lot more. It's just, we got to get to the right point in civilization, but we're not there right now.
Got it.
The only people that contend with what I've just said about the grid are physicists. Okay. It's rarely ever a chemical engineer or a petroleum engineer or people who work in the energy grid on a more regular basis.
Yeah, because you see a lot of this stuff about like, I mean, I don't know the numbers, but it's like the sun shines X gigawatts of energy on the surface of the Earth, every day or something. And if we captured some X percentage of that, we could power, Y number of cities. And it's like, oh wow, like those numbers seem to like be pretty attractive. And then the narrative is also very wonderful. It's like we don't need to build a fusion reactor on Earth. We have like a giant fusion reactor in the sky. Why don't we just. But these are all obviously narratives. People who aren't deep into the reality of how this stuff works will when you're not deep in the reality, all you have is the narratives to go off of. But it sounds very logical. It sounds like it makes sense. But you're saying it's because of these intermittencies, because
You'll
you know,
you'll never hear a petroleum, chemical, or materials engineer refer to themselves as a polymath. You will often hear a CS and physicist and a neuroscience major refer to themselves
right.
as such.
Okay, interesting, interesting. Very, it's like a dose of cold water
I
for a
said
lot of
very
folks.
I said
Yeah,
very often. So obviously you get some physicists who respect the complexity of chemistry,
right.
but most do not. And you see a lot of physicists in Bitcoin mining making nonsensical claims.
Right.
So those exist as well.
Well, yeah, I mean, this was always my frustration with chemistry in school is like, it's like you learn a rule one day and then the next day you learn something that like defies that rule. And it's like, so then what is like, how do I abstract to some principles from this? It's a little bit harder in chemistry, but,
Chemistry, biology, and geology are those analog fields which frustrate us, right? They're
right.
hard, and
Totally.
you can't be
Yeah.
a master of them. It's not like
Right.
it's not. None of the stuff is intuitive as well. That's the unfortunate part.
Yeah. 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 It doesn't abstract as easily. I mean, but it's fair. A couple places to go to. I mean, do you feel we kind of touched on a lot of things. Is there any aspect of this your critiques of American dynamism and that attitude that you think we haven't covered deeply enough or enough detail that you wanna go over? I know there was kind of the aging thing is interesting. The growth of the government as a prime mover of the American economy, the federal government is an interesting thing. Anything there that you think like you want to double click on before we move to
Yeah,
Mark and other things like that?
yeah. There's probably people that are going to listen to this that are software developers, and they're like, "Why is this relevant to me?" Well, I can give an example. So, let's say you're a software company and you build a process that saves fuel. You build something that is for a group of people that saves fuel on route optimization, or you're able to aggregate demand using software and gamification. These, there's a company called Pinduoduo. Have you heard of Pinduoduo? It was a company in China that allowed you to group order with other people, so it would aggregate the orders and reduce the stress on the route because there's more demand on the route, so like they can afford it. That aggregates demand. Demand aggregation is a great workflow to make money. The more stress there is on the US grid, the more money you're going to make on aggregating demand. So there's ways to think about materials energy balances and software that are very, very productive if you take the time to, is what I would say. Because you think about it, like you can build some physical infrastructure, would cost you a lot of kilowatt hours, or you can move some mouse clicks and drive some traffic to something, and it could lead to an end to action that ends up reducing the number of total kilowatt hours required in the system. So if there's a company called Ohm Connect. Have you heard of them? They do demand response. So you sign up at OHM Connect, you sign up, and then they'll text message you to turn off your lights, and it reduces the stress on the grid, and the utility will give them a kickback to give to you. There's things like this that pay, and many of the greatest software companies save people a lot of time and physical transport. Those are interesting, or they aggregate demand into one place. So, for example, if you built an app that was able to, maybe you built a chatbot that brokered empty loads of bus tickets so that all the buses are overutilized without being exposed to slippage, right? These are things you can do with AI and software that have a significant impact, right?
Yeah, just finding hidden efficiencies in systems and processes and things of that nature.
For sure.
Uh, And do you want to go into a little bit? I mean, you touched on it a little bit, but like the mechanism by which the U.S. government is going to become like U.S. government. I think you said in your blog post 50+% of
I
GDP is going to. Go ahead.
I think
Go ahead.
we're already there.
Yeah, I've seen some posts talking about like I've seen some other interesting analysis on this also, but like, is it just
It's
like
it's con-
government
it's
outlays, or
convoluted.
is there like, go ahead, yeah.
It's convoluted, right? Because most of us see PE people as like business people. I don't. Save for venture capitalists. Most of us see, oh, these are really good business people and industrialists. I don't. They're chasing government yield with private dollars or other government dollars, right? In one way or the other. They're painting the tape, right? Like, let's say I invest in a fintech bank and then all my other portfolio companies use that fintech bank. And then I sell that to the street, but it was all incestuous dollars in that bank. That was really just a recycle mechanic or gymnastics on that bank. And it might have gotten me to a big enough valuation to start to attract customers outside of that. That wasn't like a productive yield at the end of the day. And we know this to be true. What I'm saying is not controversial. People accept this. So I think that a large percentage of the total private capital deployed to PE and VC and private credit, um, I think it's kind of like the stealth nationalization of all U.S. assets. We just don't see it that way, right?
Right,
When a
right.
PE firm buys something, you say, "Oh, private guy, industrialist, has a nice like necktie, whatever," right?
Mhm.
Nah, this is government people. These are government contractors. Let's look at them this way. Like, there's
Mhm.
7 million government contractors,
Mhm.
like individual people. I think the
Mhm.
number might be closer to 10 million if
Mhm.
we add up all the people in venture capital, PE, and all the companies they employ. Maybe even
Mhm.
more.
Mhm. Well,
So,
let me hit you. Go ahead, go ahead.
no,
Finish
go
your
ahead.
thought. I wanna try to see if we can tease out and make sense of this thing of like what counts as a productive invest. Like, let me put it ask you a question this way. This it's gonna sound, I don't know how this is gonna sound, but what is necessarily wrong if you have a more coordinated system in this way, where it's like, um, you know, well, if you could lay out the actual mechanism by which you think, PE is sort of an extension of sort of government money. I think that may not be 100% clear. It's not like the Treasury is investing in these funds, but through some
No,
other
no, but it's
mechanism.
it's it's
Go ahead.
pension money. It's pension money.
Pension money. Yeah, it's like the CalPERS and these kinds of things yeah.
CalPERS, CalSTRS, et cetera, et cetera. There's a guy named Edward Seidel, Siedle,
Okay.
and he has a blog on Substack called Pension Warrior.
Yeah.
If you want to understand this part of the stack, read everything he's written.
Okay.
There's another guy named Adam Michel,
Yeah.
Michel. He
Yeah.
was at the Heritage Foundation. I believe he's somewhere new, but
Yeah.
he's on Twitter, Adam N, as in Nigeria, Michelle,
Yeah.
and he writes very effectively about the tax policy of the U.S.
Hmm. Okay. No, we'll definitely check that out. And we'll link that in the description also. But fundamentally, this, you mentioned before, like you don't think there was ever really a fully free market. That's always like something you're trying to, move towards, but it's not something that actually exists in its pure form, ever existed in reality. And in a similar way, it's like private and public enterprise. I'm just playing a devil's advocate, trying to like uh, explore this a little bit. I mean, the government and corporations, they've always sort of worked in a kind of coordinated fashion, right? That's how,
Yeah, I don't like
in
you.
the
You,
real
you,
world,
you
that's how things happen, right? So like what is the problem here? What I want to kind of get out is like how you differentiate between what counts as like an actual productive investment and what's like not a productive investment. And you're saying like they're not swashbuckling industrialists and all this kind of stuff to like, I think, get at that intuition, but I want to like bring it out a little bit more. It's like,
okay,
what,
yeah.
you see what I'm saying? Go ahead.
So a swashbuckling industrialist investment, and some of them are. Some of this pension money has been allocated to things that have high energy return on investment, lower chemical, geological, industrial process footprint, and lower stress on the grid. Those things do exist. Arguably, natural gas fracking, a trend of 10 years, built, probably 100 billionaires. They built a ton of people that were going to become billionaires between like 2009 and 2019. So there are things, but they would fall
Sure.
under that sort of bucket or territory. And the people you want to pay attention to are chemical engineers because they have the highest return on investment. People who are doing things with chemistry that are interesting,
Yeah.
that's the crew to watch closely. There's only 30,000. Not many of them are building companies, but when they do, you
Yeah.
got to pay attention.
Okay. Well, I will try to query that database to find all those people. Maybe we can invite them for a talk. But go ahead. But so like the the folks like, building out, new fracking technology to like take advantage of, shale deposits and things like that. That's like that counts as productive, but doing something else, and you mentioned like rolling up HVAC businesses, the kind of boring business trend, and then securitizing them and selling them in an IPO or something of that nature. Why is that
That's a
not
that's
good
a
deployment of capital? Yeah.
that's a balance sheet workflow. There was no new efficiency gained. They used cheap government capital
Mm,
that the free market couldn't obtain easily.
mm, mm,
Um, or because you need lawyers and paperwork wranglers to do stuff, right? So I wouldn't consider that like productive. Like if I had to go to aliens and I had to explain to them planet Earth, they'd be
mm.
like, "What the fuck did they do? How is that a business? That doesn't make any sense, right?"
Okay.
Whereas they'd go and
Okay.
look at the fracking thing and say, "Oh, okay, they're using this much energy, they're getting this type of output. It reduces the total transportation to a kilowatt hour or per kilowatt hour mile. That makes sense. I can make that whack out." Um,
Yeah.
so there never was a free market. Like even Oracle, Oracle, AWS, or Amazon, and Facebook. Everybody I know who's kind of like who kind of bobs between New York and DC. They kind of accept that these are like some form of CIA, NSA, something or another.
Okay.
They're not like everything's
Yeah.
at a certain level. Everything is government, right?
Right.
Um, and it's hard for us to perceive because we're not there, right? Like I'm in a flyover state right now for the most part. Texas
Yeah.
doesn't have a lot of pension assets in it the same way that other states do.
Mm. Okay. So it seems like this, we keep coming back to this material energy balance, like these three things, these three aspects of improving an economy's material energy balance is like very core to how you analyze whether something is like creating true wealth and is really a productive investment versus maybe shifting dollars from one place to another, but not necessarily adding real wealth into the system.
Yeah,
Is that, yeah.
you're not getting it. Like, so for example, I made a lot of money on Tesla, but
Yeah.
that damages the energy grid. It has a higher chemical, geological, industrial process footprint,
Right.
and it takes more kilowatt hours per mile period on a Tesla than other forms of energy when you do the farm to fork grid analysis,
Okay.
right? Of the minerals, the extraction, the payback period, et cetera, et cetera.
Got it. Let's do this then. I don't know if I don't know how much time you have. I could keep going, but I think we mentioned a 90
I gotta
minute
jump.
kind of stop.
I do have to jump, so I have a hard
Yeah.
stop in a few minutes.
Okay. So we'll get to Mark later. Maybe I'll just kind of mention that. If you want to give a little teaser to that, we'll
Yeah.
link it in the thing. But I
Okay.
really want to get into
I don't mind getting into it right now if you want.
okay, go for it. For it.
So there's this concept of different modalities of crude oil are extracted from the ground in different parts of the world, and
Yeah.
then they have to be refined in a certain type of refinery.
Mhm.
No two refineries aren't all the same, right?
Okay.
So because certain countries push out certain qualities of crude oil and certain refineries accept certain qualities of crude oil, our economies are interdependent.
Mhm.
So Iranian crude oil that's sanctioned makes its way to China.
Mhm.
Is Israel going to attack their third largest trading partner's supply of crude oil
Mhm.
in a long and serious and sustained way? I don't
Mhm.
think so.
Mhm.
Is Iran going to attack one of China's trading partners? I don't know. Like these
Mhm.
refinery things kind of tie us together in a quiet fabric.
Right.
And even Pakistan indirectly, as I understand it, they're buying products from each other via the oil and gas trade. They just don't realize it. Gwadar port is for the Chinese to move oil and gas. It's a whole thing. Like nothing's just so straightforward when you add the fabric of how these products move between refineries and countries. But this doesn't mean they won't have skirmishes. It
Right.
means it may limit the extent to which things become wars.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's a whole thing.
No, and so I think in the post you write like there's something like 825 refineries kind of spread out, not exactly evenly, but roughly decentralized in the US and Latin America, India, China, Europe. So those are some of the major Middle East, those are some of the major players. Um, and because it's kind of decentralized in this way, any one nation's refining capacity going off, out of the system for or offline for any reason would just spike oil prices, which would then just damage kind of everyone's economy. So, um, because of that, it sort of puts a block on a progression towards like total war because almost any combination of war between two entities you could think of would lead to some big chunk of refining capacity probably being taken offline, and that would just screw everyone over. And so all the powers that be will sort of bear down to make sure, something doesn't happen. Yeah.
AI kind of makes it crazy, right? There's Goodhart's
Okay.
law, which is the notion that like a metric's relevance becomes less valuable as more people look at it.
Yeah.
So the more we panic about something, the more they've prompted AIs to think about those things and watch out for them and preempt them. So
Right.
everybody right now is worried about the yen carry trade unwinding, but like if everybody's watching it,
Right.
we can kind of assume our deep state and those powers that be are doing something about it.
Right. Or manage it. Yeah. Okay.
So it's good.
Okay.
I always say AI has shrunk. The threshold for a metric to fall under Goodhart's law used to be
Mm,
a lot higher. I think AI is going to make that threshold go lower.
that's really interesting. That's a really interesting concept. Um, it's a very interesting mutually assured refining capacity. I think is the mark is kind of the meme that you're trying to put out there, and I think it's a very interesting lens through which to sort of analyze things. We don't have enough time to sort of dig into it, but maybe the last, but I'll link it in the description if people want to read it. Maybe the last thing I wanted to get into before you go is just you seem to have such like a broad and it's kind of almost like independently developed set of concepts and frameworks with which you understand or try to make sense of like what's going on in the world in a very kind of broad way. And that's like that's the sign of like putting in a lot of time and effort and form your own concepts and frameworks and things like that. And gives you kind of a unique perspective on a lot of things. How to somebody who wants to be kind of a student of how the world works and wants to deepen their understanding, like what are some of the principles that you would recommend? One, principles for studying, like epistemic principle, like how to go about the process of learning. And two, things like the material energy balance, those three things that you like principles that you've extracted through your learning that really help condense a lot of information and make a lot of sense of things that are like just really powerful explanatory principles. Like any insight you want to share on that, I think would be really cool.
Yeah. So there was this book I read when I was younger. It was called A Measure of Reality. It's the art and science and the game mechanics of how we measure things. Right. So that became an obsession. And then um, one of the reasons that my materials energy balance obsession began was because I found it very difficult to comprehend financial systems. Like a currency is a very complex thing to actually understand, whereas like a kilowatt hour, I can kind of universally understand, right? The power of a kilowatt, I can understand. The joule, I can comprehend, right? And sometimes measurements are really complex, right? So like to measure radiation, there's 4 different methods. I always have to look back at the reference chart for them. So when I go into a system, I'm always wondering, do I have to come up with a synthetic measurement to measure it or synthetic metric to measure it? Or are there existing ones that suffice? There's another book called Energy and Civilization by Vaclav Smil. I've been reading his work for over 20 years. Pretty much every research paper and
I
book.
have it here somewhere. I was going to try to grab it, but it's not
Yeah.
next to me right now. Yeah.
So Vaclav, I've been reading well before Bill Gates made him popular, but like in my world, he was a superhero. He was like a superstar, right? And then Bill Gates kind of put like a lot of light on the guy. And so that's there's a guy who really understands materials energy balance, and he's the closest thing to a polymath. He doesn't dig too far into biology, but that kind of becomes interesting. Biology I find very complex. I don't have like a good measure of it. Another great book is it's a book by Daniel Nenni, Nenni. It's a book called An Introduction to Fabless Semiconductors. This is very interesting. It shows kind of our evolution of going from like discrete components and transistors, conductors, resistors, inductors, and diodes to kind of like an ASIC that's like a chip on silicon and FPGA and kind of these things, and how when you go to an ASIC, you can get a 10x to 100x yield on energy efficiency. I think these were 3 foundational books in changing my understanding of like civilization. And then history is always kind of bastardized, and we've seen that. Like I've seen that in my youth, right? Like things we were told and then things we're told now versus everything. So I find history much harder to track. But I do find it interesting to talk to people and hear the oral histories of things. I also like to understand behavior. So, like, I like to see if there's fossils of human behavior that exist across civilizations and why they do things that way. But I would say these are like three foundational books or, kind of protocols to think about things. They're devoid of a deep understanding of biology, though. I will be frank about that. And they're devoid of a deep understanding of geology. So they're limited in scoping. So there's that. And as far as chemistry, you don't have to understand it really well to get the core, to grok the core points that Vaclav is pointing out. But it will allow you to respect the complexity of chemistry. So those are, I'd say, like three of the core things. But I don't think anything I'm saying is unique. I do think my framework for understanding systems of energy is somewhat unique, and that I've put it together in a blueprint. So I've had people that are really, I thought it wasn't, and then I've had people that are really experienced chemical engineers that like told me they stole it and used it in their presentations and stuff, and I was like, oh, okay, that's cool. So I think there is maybe something novel in the assembly, but each of the individual points, not me.
Hmm. Very cool. Well, maybe a polymath is a more rare thing, but autodidact is definitely a thing, and it seems like
No, not really. I'm the son of a chemist as well, so like
okay, all
don't
right.
be deluded.
Well,
I've had science in my
yeah,
blood, so
nothing. There's no perfect free market. There's no perfect autodidacts either. Fair enough. But uh, any book you're reading right now, or that you read more recently that's been really influential? Last question.
um, I've been reading some books on linguistics. I
Okay.
do find linguistics more fascinating as we are delving into AI. So I like
True.
to study like kind of the differences between language. No particular book, but like I'm studying a lot of Spanish and Greek, and it's kind of fascinating to me. How language influences like behavior in many ways, right? So
Right.
like
Totally.
I used to think Spanish speaking people were very emotional. It's just that they
Mm,
have more vocabulary and daily speech to cover
mm,
the emotions, whereas English is kind of bland in that sense. We have a large vocabulary, but the daily usage of it is very limited,
right.
right?
That's
So things
interesting.
like that,
That's
right?
interesting. Yeah.
So I also think it's interesting. Like you ask an American, you can say, "Do you like it?" You can't say that in some other languages because they'll give you a long answer,
Oh, really?
right?
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
hey, I've got to jump. I'm running late,
Yeah.
but I
Totally.
appreciate you.
Thanks, man. Thanks for taking the time.
Have a good one. Bye.